I want to thank our sponsors for tonight's class, Devorah Topper and Yuri Shniansky, to thank the rabbis for these great learning opportunities. The feelings are mutual. We personally feel thrilled of all of the participation that happens in the Zoom classes. And the fact that we get to stay connected specifically through the area of learning Torah together is truly an honor. So thank you to Devorah and Yuri, and really thank you to each and every one of you. We are about to enter into this coming week. A highlight on the Jewish calendar. We are going to be celebrating the greatest anniversary of the greatest moment of all of world history, and that is the anniversary of the giving of the Torah itself, where the Torah was given to us at Har Sinai, where we had a mass revelation of God to the entire people, and it was an unbelievable experience. It was the culmination of the entire creation of the world. And we are about to, this Shabbos, read Parshas Bamidbar. What's the connection between Parshas Bamidbar and Shavuos? So, in fact, we find that the Talmud says that Parshas Bamidbar needs to happen before Shavuos. And it begs the question, why? So take a look at the Gemara. The Gemara says the following. Tanya, Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer. Reb Shimon ben Elazar said, Ezra tikan lehen li Yisrael, that Ezra HaSofer was one of the last of the Nevi'im. He made an establishment for the Jewish people, shiu korin klolo shebetoras kohanim kodem atzeres, that there was an established halacha that was made by Ezra. This is during the time of resurgence back to Israel, that Ezra made a takana that we must read the klolos, the parsha of giving musar, of giving rebuke to Klal Yisrael that we did in this past week's parsha, that we did in Parsha Bechukosai, that we have to study that as a group. We have to read that from the Torah before Shavuos. Why? So the Gemara explains, because we want to be able to enter into Shavuos with all the bad stuff behind us, where we read about all these curses that could potentially befall upon the Jews, where we get this rebuke, and we learn of potential retribution that God could take on the Jewish people for not following his ways, and it's very, very scary. So, okay, fine. Now we got that out of the way. Now we can enter into Shavuos. So Tosos points out something that the Gemara does not address. Tosos points out right over here, he says that while that is true that we are supposed to read the Parshas Bechukosai, which contains the curses that could befall upon the Jewish people before Shavuos, but the Gemara does not address why it is that we have to read Parshas Bamidbar. Because it's not that we go straight from Bechukosai into Shavuos. There's this week in between. Bechukosai was last week. Shavuos is this coming week. This Shabbos, we're reading, and under normal circumstances, if we were in Shul, we'd be reading in Shul, Parshas Bamidbar. Why then does Bamidbar, which doesn't have any curses in it, it doesn't talk about Har Sinai, well, why is Bamidbar, Parshas Bamidbar, which is a discussion of the census that was taken by Moshe in the desert, why is that, what is that doing right over here, smack between Bechukosai and Shavuos? So Tosos says, because we need a buffer. It would be too intense for us to go from the reading of the curses that could potentially befall the Jewish people, to go straight from there into Shavuos, that it's too intense, that to go from one extreme to another extreme, to go from the extreme of potential curses into this reacceptance of the Torah, it's going from too many extremes from one to the next. We need a buffer. That's what Tosos says. He says, for this reason, we we read the Parsha Bamidbar, this week's Parsha, before Shavuos, Kidei shelo lismoch hakalkalo shebechukozai la'atzeres, in order so that it's not too intense, where we go 1 week after the next of these intense moments, one negative, one extremely positive. We need a buffer in order so that we could take in, settle what we learned of what could happen if we don't follow God's ways that happened at the end of last week's Parsha before we get to Shavuos, where we have this reaffirmment, this recommitment to Torah, where we relive Kabbalas HaTorah, the acceptance of the Torah at Har Sinai. So Tosfos gives us a negative reason why we have to read Bamidbar before Shavuos. But Tosfos does not give us a positive reason. So I'd like to suggest this evening a positive reason why it is that we have to read Bamidbar before Shavuos, why it's important, why it's incumbent upon us to read this Parsha this week, which seems like when you're reading it almost like a non sequitur, like it's a very technical reading about a census that Moshe took. Why is it that it needs to happen this week before we enter into Shavuos, aside for the negative reason that Tosfos gave that we needed to be a buffer, but a positive reason as well, something that we learn from Parshas Bamidbar that maybe we could apply to the holiday of Shavuos. So Parshas Bamidbar begins, as I mentioned before, with the census that Moshe Rabbeinu took. Take a look at the Torah. Says the following: Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe Bamidbar Sinai ba'ol Moed. That God tells Moshe in the Sinai desert, in Oel Moed. Oel Moed was the meeting tent. It was the center, the Torah center that Moshe would teach from. People would come meet from him there. Be'echad l'chodesh hasheni. This is the first of the second month. So this is Rosh Chodesh Iyar. B'shana hashenis l'teitzim me'eretz Mitzrayim le'mor. In the second year after they left Egypt. So a year has gone by. Now it's the second year that they are entering as this time in the wilderness, and it's Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Okay, we got context. We know what year it is. We know what's going on. Fine. Next pasuk. Su'u es rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael. God commands Moshe that there is an obligation to go and count, to take a census of the Jewish people. Rashi tells us, why is it that there is an obligation to take a census? Rashi tells us the following: Mitoch chibasan lifanav, because of how much God loves the Jewish people. Mona osam kol sha'ah. He takes every opportunity he can to count us. Like someone who has something very valuable. Like I know myself growing up, I was obsessed with collecting basketball cards. Right, I had an amazing collection of basketball cards. Specifically, I had an amazing collection. It just happens to be of Kobe Bryant cards, who recently passed away tragically. I had an amazing collection of Kobe Bryant trading cards, and I think that they're probably somewhere still in my parents' house. I think I have something like 50, 60 Kobe Bryant cards. And I remember every time I'd get a new one, I'd recount the whole pile. And every time I had an opportunity, I'd count it again. And I would get these Beckett's so I could look up their pricing and how much they're worth. And I would always be counting and counting and counting because it was something that was meaningful to me. And therefore, I was always counting it. God as well, that he always wanted to keep a count. Now, we have to ask a question over here. God didn't know how many Jews there are. Why did he need a count? God knows how many there are. He knows everything. So God didn't need the census. So it's not that he needed the report from Moshe. Please give me your quarterly report, your annual report on how many Jews there are. It's not like this is a Pew study that Moshe needed to run to give data to God. So then why is it that the census needed to take place? And if it was simply for Moshe to know how many Jews there are, so God could have just told him. So why does Moshe then have to go through this process of counting one by one, to go through a census? God could have told him how many there are. It's not clearly for God's sake, because God knows how many. It's not for Moshe's sake, because Moshe could have been told by God how many there are. So we're left with one more option. What was the purpose of the counting? Who was it for? Who did it benefit? It benefited the Jewish people. Take a look again at the Pesukim. The Torah says, Se'u es rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael. To go and take a census of the Jewish people. Now, I am translating in an easily understandable English. Technically speaking, this is not the technical translation of the pasuk. This is the way I explained it, is what Onkelos says. Onkelos says, Kiblu yas chushban kol knishta de bnei Yisrael. Go take a chushban, which means a census. But when you look at the words are very striking that are used. The language is very striking. Su'u technically means to lift up. Et rosh, the heads. Kol adat b'nei Yisrael, of the Jewish people. Why would the Torah use the language of su'u, to lift up, when talking about a census? And why use the word rosh? Why speak about the heads? Speak about, just say, pikdu, go take accounting, saper, go do accounting of kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Skip the rosh part. Why is there this word se'u, which means to lift up? In this context, we're using to mean census. And why have the word rosh over here? So one of the most beautiful explanations of this pasuk is that God wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to make a point to every single Jew that came to be part of the census. The message that needed to be made clear to every single Jew that entered into the Oel Moed to be a part of the census is that you matter. Your participation matters. That this isn't just one big number. How many members are we? But rather each and every one of you, each and every member of Klal Yisrael counts. And when that happens, su'u, when you take a census in that style, where it's more than just the big number, but it's the small number of each and every one, so then su'u, you become lifted. You're uplifted by something like that. To feel like the Rosh, that you feel like you're the top, you're the most important. You are just as important as your neighbor. A Kohen, a Levi, a Yisrael, you came from Levi, Yeshimon, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter what kind of accent you have. It doesn't matter. Every single Jew counts. Every single Jew is important. And every single Jew is something that you feel like they're a part of something major. When you take a census in that style, so then it becomes su'u, you become uplifted. Maybe it's for this reason that we read Parshas Bamidbar before Shavuos. Because specifically in the realm of Torah, it needs to happen as a group. Without 100% participation, so then we'll lose the Torah. We lose what the Torah was intended for. You know, the Torah was not given to one person. The Torah was not given to Moshe Rabbeinu, who then went on to teach it. The Torah was given to all of Klal Yisrael. We were one nation standing under the mountain. We all heard God's voice. We all were part of the experience of Har Sinai. And then Moshe filled in the details for us. But the acceptance of the Torah, Na'aseh v'Nishma, happened as a group. There weren't just these, few individuals that, were privy to the Torah. No. Every single Jew said Na'aseh v'Nishma. As the Torah says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged Ahar, that we all together as one stood under the mountain, and as Rashi says, Ki ish echad b'lev echad, as one body, as one person with one heart. We were one organism. And just like in a person, if your pinky hurts, you feel it. You don't just say, "Oh no, it's a separate part of my body." That if someone feels an ache or a pain in one area, so it can throw your entire being off. That someone can walk with a limp because they have a bad pinky toe. It can throw everything off. That is the way that Klal Yisrael has to be. We need 100% participation. That it's not enough for just the Gedolei Yisrael to have, amazing entry into what is contained within the Torah. No, there needs to be 100% participation. And through that, Se'u es Rosh Kol Adas B'nai Yisrael, we become uplifted. That could be why that's why Parsha Bamidbar needs to take place before Shavuos. Because as we enter Shavuos, as we enter into the Zman of Kabbalas HaTorah, where we re-accept the Torah, we need to accept it in this kind of a fashion. Not thinking that, it's me and me alone that is going to be engaged with the Torah, but it is the entire Jewish people that needs to be engaged with the Torah. There's an amazing question that was posed to the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer from Frankfurt, and at a very young age, he went to Petersburg, and he was the Rav in Petersburg and in the Oberlander region of Slovakia and Hungary, in 18th century, Gaon Shebegaonim. He was born in the mid-18th century, died at the beginning of the 19th century. He was unbelievable, the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer, in his responsa, the Chassam Sofer, in his responsa, was posed a question by a community. There was a community that was building a new sanctuary. And they had a very unique design to their sanctuary. They wanted that their sanctuary should have the bima, the place, the table that the Torah is read from, not in the center, as the Rambam says, the bima should be placed in the center, but rather they wanted it in the front. So is that permissible? Should they have their bima in the front for whatever reason, maybe acoustically or from a civil engineering perspective, there was need to have it in the front. For whatever reason there was, they wanted to have their bima in the front, and they posed the question to the Chassam Sofer, is that okay? The Chassam Sofer said, no. The bima needs to be in the center of the shul so that it's as easily accessible by each person of the shul. It's in the center to symbolize that the Torah, where we read the Torah from, goes out from the center equally to all parts, because every single person has equal right to the Torah, equal point of connection. There's a very scary Gemara, almost like a very difficult Gemara to understand. The Talmud tells us in Maseches Nedarim on Daf Pei Aleph that one of the reasons why the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed is because, the Gemara says, Shelo birchu b'Torah tchila, because they did not recite birchas haTorah. Now, blessings generally are only rabbinic in nature. They're a rabbinic establishment that the rabbis instituted for different reasons why it is that blessings were instituted, but blessings in general are rabbinic. There are two blessings, however, that are from the Torah. One is benching, where the Torah says in Parshas Eikev, achalta v'savata ubeirachta, when one eats and then they are satisfied, they should bench. And the Torah says also, Ki Shem Hashem Ekra Havu Gadol Eloheinu, that when one wants to engage with God, then they need to do something great. And the Gemara in Brachos and Daf Chaf Aleph learns from there that they need to say Birchas HaTorah. So we see that Birchas HaTorah is from the Torah. The blessing that's recited on learning Torah is a Torah establishment. It's a biblical commandment, as the Ramban says. And benching is a biblical commandment. Now, the Gemara Nedarim says that one of the reasons the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed was because the Jewish people at that time, even though they learned Torah and they were involved in mitzvot and they did good things, but they didn't say the blessing upon learning Torah. They didn't say Birchas HaTorah. That's a reason to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Like, it's very surprising. So the Rishonim and the different commentaries try and figure out exactly, what the Gemara is alluding to, that how could it be that just because they did not recite this blessing upon the Torah that God destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, it can't be. But maybe we could suggest, because when you look at the text of Birchas HaTorah, maybe they said it. but maybe they didn't internalize it. The text of Birchas HaTorah is the following. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, God, Asher kidishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu, that you have commanded us, la'asok b'divrei Torah, to involve ourselves in learning Torah. And then we beseech God, we request. There's a request in the blessing itself. V'harevna Hashem Elokeinu es divrei Torah secha. God, please, will you make the Torah sweet, accessible, palpable, something that we can, that is sweet in our mouths, that's something that we enjoy, something that we want to be a part of? That we ask God to make the Torah sweet for us. But then we say, Bifinu ubefi amcha beis Yisrael, not just sweet in our mouths, but sweet in the mouths of all of the entire Jewish people. We know that what was the big problem that the Jewish people were facing then, and we know that today, why we don't have the Beis HaMikdash now. Why was the Beis HaMikdash destroyed? The most classical reason that's given? Because of sinas chinam. The Gemara tells us in Yuma that there was baseless hatred, meaning we didn't care about one another, genuinely care about one another. They missed the whole point of Birchas HaTorah. When the Gemara in Nedarim says that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because they did not recite Birchas HaTorah, of course they recited Birchas HaTorah. It's that they didn't internalize it. They didn't internalize the message of Birchas HaTorah. And the message that we say in Birchas HaTorah is that we ask God that the Torah shouldn't just be sweet in our mouths, but it should be sweet in the mouths of every single Jew. Because every single Jew matters. That's the way Torah needs to be engaged. It needs to be engaged with the frame of mind that it's not just me that needs to learn Torah. It's not just me that needs to gain from the Torah, but it's every single Jew. We need 100% participation. The Maharal, has a beautiful explanation to the Memches Kinyanim. We are going to be having a program a couple days before Shavuos, on Tuesday night before Shavuos, this coming week, where the four rabbis of the community, me, Rabbi Wogelanter, Rabbi Gopolsky, and Rabbi Dansker from Beth Jacob, are going to be having a joint pre-Shavuos program where we're going to be going through the Memches Kinyanim, the 48 ways to acquire the Torah. Now, what does this mean, the 48 ways to acquire the Torah? So there's a brisa that appears at the end that's kind of like an addendum to Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers, which has kind of like a step-by-step process of how one acquires Torah, kind of like a how-to manual, a how-to book. Right? Like when I just built a bike for my daughter. We ordered her a bike in the mail. It came with directions. So, it doesn't take a lot of brains for me to figure out how to build the bike, because there's a manual of how to do it. So the Torah is the same way. How does one attain, a requisite amount of Torah to be considered a ben Torah, someone who really lives by the Torah? So there's a manual. That's the way the Maharal explains it. There's a manual. Those are the 48 ways to acquire the Torah. One of the steps in the manual book to acquire the Torah is to refine your character in such a way that you are nosei ba'ol im chavero. You carry the burden of your friend on your back. You feel the pain that they go through. This is one of the ways that you have to acquire the Torah. What's the connection? So a beautiful explanation we can say based on a story of Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz and the Mir Yeshiva in Poland. Back in Mir, Poland, one of the most prestigious yeshivas was the Mir Yeshiva, which today is located in two places, in Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh, where there are more than 7,000, I think there may be even more than 8,000 students learning in the Mir Yeshiva today, and in Brooklyn, New York, where there are hundreds more learning in the Mir branch in America. And they had to go there after a wild excursion. They were able to escape the Nazis by getting visas to Japan through Vladivostok and Kobe, Japan. And it just, Shanghai and this whole crazy wild excursion. Eventually, the yeshiva ended up in two places, in Yerushalayim and the Mir in America. But before then, when Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz was still running the yeshiva in the early part of the 20th century, so he once walked into the yeshiva. And again, this is one of the most prestigious yeshivas in all of Europe. He walks into the yeshiva, he claps on the bima, and he says, I have unfortunate news, but it seems as though I'm forced to close the yeshiva. What? Close the yeshiva? The yeshiva wasn't in some sort of a financial crisis. The students were learning at high caliber. There were people lined at the door to get a spot in the enrollment of the yeshiva. I mean, the yeshiva is thriving. You have to close the doors to the yeshiva. He said, yes, because of an episode that happened last night, I feel as though there's no purpose in keeping the yeshiva open anymore. What happened last night? So he tells the boys in the Beis Medrash that last night there were 3 students that were staying late in the Beis Medrash to learn. And after they were finished, the 3 of them were walking back to where they were staying. Back then, they did something called Es and Teg, where they would eat and sleep. They would have room and board by different members of the community. And they didn't have dormitories or things like that. They had different places they would stay in the community. So 2 of the boys lived in one location, and a 3rd boy was staying in another location, dorming in another home. But it was kind of in the same general direction. They kind of split at the end in a fork in the road. And as they're going to their respective homes that they're staying in, so they get pulled over by the police because it looked a little suspicious. I guess there may have been a curfew or something. I'm not exactly sure why they were, pulled over. They were questioned by the police. But they were questioned by the police, and right away the police asked them, do you have your papers, your identification papers? So they're searching all over themselves, and they can't find their identification papers. So the boys say, please, if you would just have a little bit of mercy on us. We live just, a block away. We each live about a block away, and we could provide you with our identification papers when we get to our homes. Would you be able to just follow us, and we'd be happy to give them to you? Sure, no problem. The police were kind. It's a bit chiddush that they were kind, even though anti-Semitism was already raging then. But they follow the boys. First, they go to the home where 2 of the boys are living at. They show their identification papers, and then the police go with this 3rd boy to go grab his identification papers. Fine. Next day at the yeshiva, everything's back to normal. 3 boys are there. Everybody's safe. Rabbi Reich looks at the yeshiva and says, how were the first 2 boys able to sleep that night? Their 3rd friend was left alone with the police, with the anti-Semitic police in Mir, Poland, alone. And the 2 of you were able to sleep that night? You left him? If we're producing boys like that, said Rabbi Reich, producing boys that can leave their 3rd friend with the police like that and actually be able to go to sleep that night, then we're better off just closing the yeshiva. I mean, thank God he didn't close the yeshiva, and he made a very significant point that made a lasting impression on the boys, I'm sure. Because if you're not a proper base kibul, if you're not a proper vessel in order for the Torah to be accepted into, if you're not able to acquire the Torah through refined character traits because you don't actually care about your fellow, then what's the purpose of learning the Torah at all? You're missing the whole point. You're missing the point of why we engage with the Torah. We engage with the Torah in order so that we can have 100% participation, in order so that we can look out for one another, in order so that we don't look the other way when there's a Jew that's being hurt or potentially could be being hurt. When we have that kind of a perspective, so then it becomes a su'u es rosh kol adas b'nei Yisrael. And when we go into Shavuos with the mindset of, I'm not going to Shavuos just for me, but I'm going to Shavuos for my neighbor, for my friends, for my family, for my loved ones, for every single person in Klal Yisrael. So then it becomes a different kind of a Kabbalah Satorah. It becomes a lasting Kabbalah Satorah. Because that's the way the Torah was given. The Torah was not given to individuals. The Torah was given to all of Klal Yisrael. There was 100% participation. And, I just want to end with a basic question, which is, well, why is it so important for us to have 100% participation? I think we've explained that is definitely the case. that there's a necessity for there to be 100% participation, that there's a necessity for the Torah to be accessible to every single Jew. There's a necessity for that. But why? Why is that so necessary? So I think we could suggest, based on a Rambam. There's a Mishnah that appears at the beginning of Masechet Peah. The Mishnah says the following: Elu dvarim she'en lem shiur, that there are certain mitzvos that have no, minimum requirement. That whatever you do, whatever you give is good enough. And it goes on to list different mitzvos: Peah, Bikurim, Harayon, different agricultural mitzvos that, however much you give, some of them, there's no minimum requirement, it's good enough. And then the Mishnah continues and it says, Ugemilut chasadim, acts of kindness, there's no minimum requirement. It's not that one needs to give a certain amount. The rabbis established that one needs to give meiser ksafim, one needs to give, 10% of their income to charity, but that's a rabbinic establishment. From a Torah perspective, there's no minimum requirement. As long as you help out a little bit, that's good enough. And then the Torah says, the Talmud Torah keneged kulam. And learning Torah is tantamount to all of them. And then the Mishnah continues, Ve'elu dvarim she'adam ochel peroteim ba'olam hazeh va'akeren kayem lo l'olam haba. The Mishnah goes on to explain that there are certain mitzvos that we know we get reward for all mitzvos that we do. Some of the reward we see in this world, some of the reward we get in the next world. And we have no clue when the reward is coming. We just believe that the reward is coming. It's one of the fundamental beliefs in Judaism, that we get rewarded for doing good and we get punished for doing bad. Why we find sometimes that the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer is something that we as human beings, the Rambam says, will never understand because that is God's cheshbon. God keeps track and he has a master plan, but know that at the end of the day, the reward in its wholehearted sense will be going to the righteous, certainly in the world to come. However, the Mishnah says that there are some mitzvot, there are some commandments that if you do in this world, you will get rewarded both in this world and in the world to come. You get a double portion of reward. What are those mitzvos? Kibud aveim, honoring parents. Gemilut chasadim, doing acts of kindness. Hava shalom ben adam lechavero, making peace between people. V'talmud Torah keneged kulam, and learning Torah is tantamount to all of them. Now, what is the connection between learning Torah and doing all of these things that seem to be just being a basic good person, honoring your parents, making peace between people, doing acts of kindness? And then the Mishnah ends off and it says, and learning Torah. And not only that, but learning Torah, you get reward in this world, and it's tantamount to all of them, meaning you get more reward for learning Torah than any of the other ones on the list. Why? So the Rambam explains as follows. What is the reward you get both in this world and in the next world for, let's say, for example, doing acts of kindness? We have this Adat errands group that's going on, that people are going and running errands for one another. It's a beautiful thing. So we know we're going to get reward in the next world because that's the way that mitzvot work, that I get reward for the good things that I do. But what is the reward I get in this world? The Rambam says the reward you get is that you get to live in a better world. Every time someone does an errand for another person, they do a favor for someone else, they do some sort of act of kindness, a chesed, you made the world a better place to live. And the fact that you get to live in such a world means that you are being rewarded with living in a better world. That's what the Mishnah means, the Rambam says, that you get reward, of course, in the next world, but also in this world, because in this world, you made it into a better place, and you get to live in that better world. So why is learning Torah tantamount to all of them? Because how is one supposed to know what is the right thing to do? There's so much gray area in the world. What's right, what's wrong, social justice issues. There's so much that we're all trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. In fact, that the Rishonim say that could potentially be what was the punishment to Adam and Chava after eating from the Eitz Hadas. The Rambam says that when they ate from the Eitz Hadas, beforehand, everything was black and white. But after they ate from the Eitz Hadas, everything turned into gray. They had to figure out what was right and wrong. Things turned from good to evil as opposed to from true and false. True and false existed before they ate from the tree of knowledge, and then after they ate from the tree of knowledge, things turned from that the options are bad and good, and you have to figure out between bad and good. It's not objective anymore. There's only one thing that is objectively good, one thing that has objectively good ethics. Unquestionably, the Torah. Why? Because it's given by God. God is telling you what is good and not good. Through learning the Torah, a person builds for themselves a sense of morale that is perfect, that is pure, assuming you actually take it to heart, assuming you actually apply it. But if you do it right, then you could walk away becoming a person that is perfect in the way they function morally. So therefore, says the Rambam, why is learning Torah tantamount to all of those other mitzvos? Because through learning Torah, you get the guidebook of how to be a good person, and therefore you're going to make the world into a better place. We as a people who are the Or Lagoyim, as the Torah tells us, we are the light unto the nation. We as a Jewish people have a requirement. There's a necessity for us to have 100% participation in Talmud Torah. Why? In order so that we can be that light unto the nation. In order so that we can make the world a better place. It's our responsibility to do so. We were the chosen nation for that purpose. God gave us the Torah in order so that we could do that. In order so that we could be the example, the prime example in the world of how to live perfectly moral lives. Unfortunately, we fail too often, and that's why we need to re-engage ourselves. As we approach Shavuos, we need to engage ourselves with this perspective in learning Torah, that learning Torah is not an intellectual pursuit. It's not even potentially only a spiritual pursuit. It's engaging in a totally character-forming pursuit. You can mold every aspect of yourself, not just for you to become a better person, but for you to uplift the entire world. And that's why it's important for us to be Se'u'es Rosh Kol Adas B'nai Yisrael before we enter into Shavuos. To understand that there's a requirement for 100% participation in order so that every single Jew could be that light. Every single Jew could build for themselves this form of moral ethics. There's, I just want to share a personal story to this end before we finish the class. As many of you know, my grandmother, Sarah Bat Amos Esther, Allah Shalom, passed away about a year and a half ago. She was an extremely righteous person. She was one of these people that understood that, engaged in Torah is something that needs to be internalized in order so that you could become that kind of a light. And there's a story, we say our rabbis teach us that tzaddikim afilu b'misasam nikru chayim, that after the righteous pass away, they're still considered alive because we still are seeing the ripple of all the good that they did in this world. And there was an example that happened recently that just blew my entire family away. My grandmother lives, her house, she lived in a small house in Edison, New Jersey, where I grew up, where her husband, my grandfather, should live and be well, is still living there. And, so they have, they live in, one of the areas of town that's not heavily populated by Jews. And they have a neighbor that's, lives across the street from them, that she's a nice lady. Unfortunately, Nebuch, she, had a rough marriage, and now she has, a number of kids living in her small little apartment that's across the street from my grandmother's house. She, a number of years ago, when she was going through these troubles, my grandmother would go over to the house. She'd bring food over just to lift her spirits a little bit, give her some encouragement. She started working as a bagger in a grocery store, because my grandmother was able to encourage her that she has to be able to go out to provide for her family, and just to just be that good, friendly face neighbor for this young lady who was going through some troubles. Just a couple of months ago, this is already a year plus after my grandmother passed away. Just a couple of months ago, this lady comes over with mask and gloves and keeping, many feet distance away from the house, but came over and knocked on the door and, wanted to see how my grandfather's doing and my aunt and my family are doing. And, she starts talking to them, and she says, just in the last few months, I've actually become a manager at Costco, where the last time that anyone had engaged with her, she was working as a janitor at Costco. She was cleaning up at Costco. And then she, over the last couple of years, worked her way into becoming a manager. And she says to my grandfather and to my aunt, and she says that if you guys need anything, and during this time, and this is again right at the beginning of the pandemic, when eggs, milk, cheese, the basic necessity, toilet paper, these things were flying off the shelf like they were worth their weight in gold. And she said, because I'm there before anyone else comes in, and I'm there when the shipments come. If you need anything, just let me know. I'd be happy to take care of it for you. So of course they were blown away by the gesture, and they were very thankful, and they gave her a list. She goes, and she, brings home, the list of all the items that they needed, and totally stocked with whatever they needed during this pandemic. So my grandfather goes to pay her for, a few $100s worth of supplies, and she says, "No, what are you doing? You can't give me any money." He says, "Why not?" "Well, what do you mean? I wouldn't be anything without Sarah. I wouldn't be anything without your wife. May she rest in peace." This is totally just from me. And throughout the pandemic, this manager at Costco that she's not a member of the Jewish community, she's not a member of the religious community, she was a neighbor that lived across the street in a small apartment that most people probably didn't even notice her. And thank God my grandmother, may she rest in peace, would go over, give her encouragement to make a real Kiddush Hashem. This is what we're talking about. This is what we mean when we say that through learning Torah, through living Torah, a person can become this kind of a moral being that sheds that light onto the nation. The more participation we have, and if Alavai, we had 100% participation, can you imagine what kind of world we'd be living in? That is what we need to be thinking about, re-engage with this doctrine as we approach the holiday of Shavuos coming up this week. We'll stop here. I'm happy to stay on for a couple of minutes if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Rabbi.